Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me this beautiful Tuesday. Here we are here today to talk about unique device identifiers. So I am Brendan with ConnectSx Customer Success, and I'm going to take you through a presentation here as the basis for our masterclass. Before I do, following this webinar, if you have any questions or if you need any help, any resources, or you're interested in learning more about ConnectSx, I'd encourage you to head over to our website. I normally take some time to show you all the resources we have there, but I have a lot to go through today. So I think that we probably have everyone we're going to get now that we've burned a couple minutes. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get going. All right, hopefully you are seeing my presentation now. So unique device identifiers, what do you need to know? We're going to start off, going through the really fun stuff. You can't really start any discussion of UDI without talking about what they are and why they're regulated. So please bear with me through that. But then we're going to get into a larger discussion of, what does this mean? How does this impact everyone in the industry? Because we are kind of past the phase of implementation. Most manufacturers have their UDIs already and are in some state of using them. And so now we're really kind of more in the operational phase where, people in the field are having to use UDI. So that, is going to surface a whole lot of new challenges and need a whole bunch more solutions. So let's get into it. Here we go. So UDI. You may be wondering why I'm forcing a Lord of the Rings reference this early on in a webinar, but I thought it was a pretty good metaphor because, in medical device identification up until UDI was really all over the place. There were a lot of different identifiers. Everyone has like a catalog number, but sometimes it's called a reference number. Sometimes it's called an item number. Maybe you use lot numbers. Maybe you use serial numbers. But then there was no standardization for how that's making its way through the supply chain and how that's actually getting stored at the point of use so that it's actually usable for the patient. For a long time, myself included, I have an implant in my body that I don't know the catalog, lot number, or even manufacturer of. So, that was more the norm, and that's what UDI is here to address. So, yeah, you can think of UDI kind of like a license plate for every medical device. We need a UDI for each item so that we can track it from its point of origin to its point of use. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that, including, running an efficient supply chain, but more importantly, patient safety. And so, if there's a recall, if there's an issue with the device, any number of things, now we can actually trace it to the cases it was used in, and then the patients, who are affected. So patient safety is the bottom line. And then I already kind of made mention of it, but traceability. So, if you just have all of your inventory out in the field, there's a wide range of, inventory management capabilities within the industry, even after UDI. So, without some identifier, how are you going to be able to track down the devices if you need to? And then who regulates it? Obviously, we're talking about the FDA here in the United States. And the final rule, I believe, was called 21 CFR Part 830, but they've published a number of guidances related to the FDA final or the UDI final rule. A lot of them in response to challenges that the industry faced and raised. This was an ongoing discussion, that we participated in as a company as well, working with the FDA, working with the industry organization AdvaMed, who have been working on behalf of medical device manufacturers to find solutions to some of these challenges, which we'll get into, to varying degrees of success. But it's still a growing field of medical device regulation and technology. So there's more to come for sure. Why does this matter? Really, it matters because we're past the implementation date. So we are past the extended dates All classes of devices should be compliant by now. I believe the FDA, I'm not able to speak to this specifically, but I believe that there may be some leeway in terms of how they're actually enforcing this regulation. But the date was September 24th, 2023. So everyone should have UDIs and they should be in use. So what exactly is regulated? And I tried to simplify this so that we didn't actually go into all of the language. There's a lot written about the UDI final rule, even within what the FDA published. But essentially, all medical devices must now have a UDI from an accredited issuing agency. And we'll talk about who those are. The label must bear the UDI in a human readable, so text format, and then an AIDC format, which I believe means automatic identification and data capture. So when we're talking about AIDC, we mean barcodes, data matrix codes, QR codes. So every label must have the human readable format and then also the digital format. And then manufacturers must submit this to the FDA Good ID database. And it's actually the first chunk of the UDI that you have to store with them and submit. But this is a required thing for manufacturers to have an account with Good ID and upload any new device identifiers that are getting produced so that the FDA has a record of them, so that the industry has a record of them. And we as a company, ConnectSx, make use of that data to help our customers use UDI and manage it. So that is a pretty powerful tool that is also continuing to grow and evolve. And then the regulation also states that devices must be direct marked with the UDI. And that is one of the prime challenges facing the medical device industry because, we're talking about devices that go into people's bodies in a lot of cases, small, minute devices that don't have the space for a sometimes 20 or 30 character identification number to be laser etched on them or some other method. So that presents a lot of challenges. And then also actually labels, thinking about those small devices, a lot of the medical device industry, or a good portion, uses non-sterile devices and surgical trays that have to be sterilized before use. So how do you pass a label through that? We've had to come up with some innovative solutions because that use case is not going away. So who are our accredited issuing agencies? So the first would be GS1. They are the largest issuing agency. They are definitely, I would consider them global. They have a list of all of the different industries that they work with. So GS1 identifiers are used in the food service industry. They're used in retail. They are very large and they've been adopted by a number of different countries, excuse me. They've been adopted by a number of different countries as they are implementing their own UDI regulations. So the US is kind of serving as a bit of a model for certain countries who are implementing their own, and GS1 is an easy standard for them to adopt because it's so widespread. Now, HIBIC is the issuing agency that I know the most about. It's much more tailored to the medical device industry and healthcare, but they also produce UDIs, and you'll see one of each of these today. But I'm much more able to talk about HIBIC. And then the last one, ICCBBA, I have no experience with, but they are the UDI for human tissue and other products that need to be regulated by a whole different set of standards. So these are the accredited agencies, and when a manufacturer signs up with one, they usually give you a labeler ID. So that would become a part of every UDI that you create so that every UDI is going to be able to be traced back to you. And then they also, with that, you get their standard, which is the rules and formats of their UDI, and so how it gets created. So now let's get into what a UDI actually is, the anatomy of a UDI. So I've already kind of been using this terminology because it's hard not to. Sorry about that. But the breakdown of the UDI has really two parts and then component parts below that. So the first part is the device identifier. This is the DI, and it's commonly referred to that way. And this is what the FDA collects. Um, this will be, uh, it'll contain the labeler ID, it'll contain the catalog number of the product. And so you can kind of think of this as like the fixed portion of the UDI, because if we produce one item but two separate lots, there will be two different UDIs, but they will share that device identifier portion. So a little bit more of an enduring part of the DI or part of the UDI. And then production identifier. And this is the more variable portion of the UDI that gets assigned when the device is actually produced. And this will contain the lot number, serial number, expiration date, manufacturing date. And so this also means that the PI will vary from company to company. So, I don't know that many companies that use serial numbers. Custom devices, I'm sure, use serial numbers. And similarly, not everybody tracks manufacturing date. So some people's UDIs may be much longer and look completely different than another company. So there is some variability there. Now, I'm going to be walking through some examples as well of UDIs and the labels, so we can show you, talk about the different components that factor in. So here's a pretty generic example of a UDI that I found on the internet. But you can see we have it in human readable format. We have the text, and then we also have a barcode. So machine readable, human readable. And then here we have listed out the different AIDC formats. I apologize for direct mark. That's not a form of AIDC. That shouldn't be there. But we talked about direct marking, that it's an important aspect of the regulation. But yeah, you essentially have barcode, linear barcodes like this one. Split linear is when you might see two different barcodes pertaining to one UDI. I'm not a fan of split linear. I'm actually not really familiar with why people employ them, but it is hard to scan. So, if you're considering what AIDC form to use, I'd look at that pretty hard before doing it and really understand the operational need in the field before you do choose. And then we have QR code. Data matrix is a good one that I've used. And then RFID. RFID refers to, if you're not familiar, I think it's radio frequency identification tags or device. They're super small, pretty cheap tags that you can put on a package or a device that will be passively tracked by different radio receivers. So they're already being used in a lot of hospital settings to track capital, like large equipment moving around. I know people are starting to use them with trays, but they also present some challenges because these RFIDs have to stand up to steam sterilization in a lot of cases. They also have a larger infrastructure cost to implement. And then you need a system that will read them and use them. So RFID is a great option if it works for you, which again, it needs to really be thought through and understood how that process will work, because it'll also impact your packaging, your manufacturing, all these things I'm sure as it pertains to your business. But moving on. Oh, I didn't really talk about the image too much. So here you see these different colors. It's just showing you the different portions of the DI, which is up here at the front, and then the PI back here, this darker section. But then within the PI, you actually have the pieces of information that are being stored. So the expiration date, you can almost make it out in most cases. So this would be like January 25th, 2021. But that's partially why these numbers get to be so long, is we actually embed the real data in there, so you'll be able to look and see the lot number, if you have kind of a reference point for what it should look like. So moving on, we have another example, another GS1 UDI up here. So you can see where these parentheses are. These would be identifiers that tell, according to the GS1 UDI standard, which again is like the formatting of how they build their UDIs, these parentheses sections are really important because that is the identifier for what follows. So it's telling whatever system is reading it that, this is the device ID, and it'll contain the catalog number and the labeler ID. And same here. I'm not exactly sure of all of these, but one of them would correspond to the lot, one probably to the expiration date. And, as a user of UDI, you don't need to know most of the time what these identifiers mean. You just need to be able to pass the UDI along, make sure it's valid, and then in some cases actually access the information that's contained within it. But if you're someone who builds UDIs or has to deal with, issues that arise related to UDIs, then you might end up getting into that deeper level of detail. And then down below, we are looking at a HIBIC UDI. It is split onto 2 lines. So normally this would be one long string of text as well. But the red section, just like above, is the device ID, DI, and the blue section is the PI. And in this situation, those slashes and dollar signs, and usually one following number are the identifiers within HIBIC. So they both work in similar ways, but they are totally different standards, and the UDIs are built completely differently. Yeah, so moving on. Here's another example of what a label might actually look like. This is a totally made up company. This was also scraped off the internet, but you can see you have all of the regular information, the warnings, how to handle and use this product, and then the catalog number, lot number, expiration date will all be here in their normal formats. But then we also have the UDI down at the bottom in human readable and AIDC formats. So the idea with the label is really to give it all the information that we need to the field, so that anyone along the way, if they need to, knows where this device is from, what needs to be done with it, how it needs to be handled, so that it can be kept safe for the patient, and so that it gets identified and makes its way to where it needs to go. So here's another. Interestingly, you can see up here in the right-hand corner that they split the UDI at each identifier. So that actually makes it a little easier if you are a user in the field and you know anything about these identifiers. It might make it a little easier for you to identify what's what. But we have the serial number, lot number, and reference number like listed out here. So yeah, it's not required for too many sales reps and distributors, even providers, to know the actual nuts and bolts and mechanics of the UDI. It's kind of just a +1 if you do, but this is a masterclass. We can't really not talk about what they are and how they're built. So, but then I can speak much more to these labels. So these are from a partner that we have, and I have 2 labels. This first one is pretty simple. There's not too much going on here. This is a reusable instrument. It is required to have a label, but it's not being sold. So, this label has a little bit less impact maybe because that UDI isn't getting collected as often. But still, we have the data matrix code and we have the UDI, which this first section here, B267, is the labeler ID, that portion of the DI. Then we have the catalog number, which you can see 10110 right in there. And then this 0 within a HIBIC UDI indicates the packaging level. So 0 is like the bottom, the sellable unit. If this was a package of jigs, it might be 1. If it was a shipper, it might be 2. But we have 0 as the usable item. Then $7, that's our identifier. And we have the lot number. And then at the end of every UDI here, we have a check digit. So the check digit, I'm not a check digit calculator. I'm not going to be able to go into this in depth, but it's something that's generated when you create the UDI to check that the rest of the data is valid according to the standard. And then our next one, so this is actually an implant label or a single-use instrument label, but something that's that obviously requires a bit more tracking because it actually has peelable stickers with the UDI that they can peel off and put right on the patient record in the medical record. So this is a great way to communicate the UDI at the point of use. Um, it also will remain on the package. We have that over here on the left-hand side, like normal. But if you look down below, I kind of broke this out, um, like I was just talking about on the last slide. This HIVIC UDI B267 would be the labeler ID. There's always a plus sign at the beginning. And then the catalog number, packaging level, and then all of these like spaces that are not highlighted are systematic components of the UDI. So you have the identifier, check digit. But then the yellow would be the lot number and expiration date. So 2025, June 23rd. So, the date formats may vary company to company. So you will end up seeing some variability, but I just really wanted to show how you can look at a UDI and derive information from it. That's why that human readable text is important. But continuing on, we've already talked about some of these, but some common challenges refer to the direct or are the direct marking requirement. So this is the one that says that the UDI must be direct marked on each device. And again, small devices, steam sterilized devices, I'm sure any number of other, manufacturing processes make this a challenge. But the FDA, after significant review and work with industry groups, created an exemption. So as long as there is other information on the device that will allow you to reference the UDI, so probably catalog number and lot number, I'm thinking, those devices would be exempt from the direct mark requirement. And then, devices that are not feasible to be direct marked would still need to have some sort of label or identification method. And if you are dealing with exceptions, I recommend taking, a deep dive into what those options are and, whether you're covered under the regulation. And, there's a lot of people out there trying to solve these problems. So if you have specific issues, you can reach out to us. Obviously, we will do our best to help you, but, it may require talking to more of a regulatory or compliance resource. And then the next one would be non-sterile devices and sets. And so when you think about, like, we'll say non-sterile screws, bone screws, little tiny things that are going to get implanted in someone's body and left there. These things need to be sterilized beforehand with, extremely high heat and moisture. And so how do you carry a UDI through that without contaminating a sterile field or, impacting some essential process? Some companies have used different tags or strips that actually get applied to the device or to the tray. This would impact, probably your packaging process, your manufacturing process, and then maybe the validations for that sterilization. So, none of these are to be taken lightly. They take a lot of work and consideration. Sterile packaging would be the obvious easiest one in terms of actually getting that UDI to the point of use. The item is packaged, has a label on it with the UDI, gets scanned before it's opened or when it's opened. And, that's just real smooth, but it also involves additional costs. You have to package it, you have to sterilize it, there's validations, So the last option is some combination of implant mapping and then recording the UDI. So in this situation, and I've seen this quite a bit where, a surgical tray might show up to the operating room and the manufacturer has produced a cross-reference sheet that allows you to look at the catalog number and lot, kind of like we talked about with the direct marking requirement. You can find the catalog and lot on the device, or as it says here, on the caddy or the tray itself. And then you can reference a cross-reference sheet to find that UDI. Not perfect. And then operationally, there's questions of whether these things are actually happening on the ground, because you have to remember you're in a surgery. There are important things happening. And the UDI is not always, probably not ever everyone's, top of mind thing. So how do you make this process something that can actually be executed on the ground level? And those are questions that need to be answered. And then they also can kind of be answered through training. And so I think something that is going to continue to evolve is the involvement of other stakeholders in UDI, and like also the weight the industry places on it. And so we'll get into that next. Who is responsible for UDIs? So under the regulations and up until pretty recently, it's really just been the medical device manufacturers and private label distributors. So these are the labelers. And the FDA defines a labeler as anyone who causes a label to be applied to a device. So if you're buying a product, you're then selling it, as your company, you very well might need a new label, private label distributing. But then, as I've kind of been referring to, we are now at the place where UDI is out there. We've been there for a while, actually. And, a lot of people in the field, I think, don't really want to think about UDI. It's been this thing that's someone else's problem. It's for the manufacturers and the regulators to deal with. But now, it's being used, and the boots on the ground have to use it. They have to know something about it. And it's becoming part of how a manufacturer relates with their customer. So, it's not just a regulation anymore. We're talking about customer service at this level. So people who are involved, and we'll say maybe they're not responsible, but they're operationally critical, and they probably will be held responsible if they aren't already by their manufacturer, would be distributors, sales reps, 3PLs if they're handling the inventory and shipping it, but then also providers, because this device identifier, or UDI, is meant to make it all the way to the point of use and be recorded in the patient record. So that means the hospital actually needs to collect it. They need to care about it. Certainly they need to know about it. But, just kind of in qualitative, I'm blanking on the word, but just word of mouth that I hear is, there's not 100% enforcement on this, or compliance. There's not 100% compliance with this right now. And as we talked about, the FDA is not being like super aggressive with their enforcement yet. But we are ultimately talking about patient safety. So these are things that I really would impress upon everyone to get a handle on, because they're here for a purpose, not just a regulatory purpose. They have an impact. So what's the point? I was already kind of getting into this one, I guess, but UDIs are helping hospitals and customers track these devices, remember what is in each patient, scan for inventory and billing. UDIs at this point are starting to be tied to reimbursement, and it's a regulated piece of information that now other organizations and institutions are starting to require or expect. So, I mean, we are talking about safety, we are talking about operational efficiency, and we are talking about ultimately getting paid, which, for people who didn't really care about this, they will probably start caring about it when it starts affecting the financials. And then sales reps, they are going to have a new set of needs to serve their customer. Customers probably don't have, like, if a sales rep is not really super interested in learning about UDI, then I bet a provider is probably not that interested either. They, again, have bigger things to worry about. But this is becoming one of them. You are now going to have to help your customers deal with UDI. You are in the customer service industry. You're not just selling product. UDI needs to be collected. And if there's an issue with the UDI, it may cause reimbursement issues. That becomes a customer issue. So that's a big one. Then understanding packaging and labels. UDIs need to be scanned. They also need to be valid. If you have an invalid UDI, a sales rep may not be able to scan that product, may not be able to sell that product. So they have a responsibility to know that, their UDIs are valid. You could eventually get in trouble probably for selling products that don't have a valid UDI. So these are things to think about. And then, ensuring accurate product information and making sure that the UDI actually does what it's supposed to do and that we keep that patient safe and have that record of the devices that were used with them. And so getting a little deeper into the sales rep and distributor responsibilities, what should they be doing? They should be learning about UDI. I don't know that they need to know the degree of nuts and bolts that we were talking about at the beginning, but it certainly wouldn't hurt. But at least knowing where it is, how to use it, knowing that it's important, and then maybe even learning what common questions might come up with their customers. These are some good things to learn because we talked about it being a customer service issue. This kind of starts becoming about competitive advantage at some point. If you're a sales rep that doesn't know about the current regulations and can't track a UDI, doesn't know what it is, that may impact your relationship with the provider. So, and if you have a UDI issue, if you have a regulation issue or regulatory issue, that's definitely not something you want associated with your name. So we are talking about supporting customers, actually carrying the UDI through to the point of use, and then, knowing something about it, being able to be a resource for your customers. And then I think a big component of this is not just knowing about the UDI and being able to answer questions for the customer, but actually, scanning that label, actually writing down the UDI when it's required, making sure that the UDI gets to where it needs to go, being the operational boots on the ground, who's hands-on with this so that it actually functions the way it's supposed to. It's a big component of it. And they are, by extension, the manufacturer, so they have the responsibility that the manufacturers have according to their association with that manufacturer. So they are responsible for communicating any UDI issues or updates to the customers and essentially being the agent of the manufacturer, which, this may be a little bit more of a regulatory burden than they've had in the past. But, as we'll talk about, UDI doesn't need to just be a regulatory burden. It could be an operational efficiency. So we'll get into that in a second, but certainly some food for thought. And then providers. What are the providers' responsibilities? Again, not regulated, but operationally essential to UDIs working the way they're supposed to work. First thing, it's in bold, capturing the UDI at the point of use. If the sales rep does their job, the manufacturer does their job, the UDI gets all the way to the point of use, and then no one takes it, puts it on the medical record. I mean, that's an operational failure. That patient won't be able to be tracked down in the event of a recall, or it will at least be much harder. So that is absolutely the bottom line for providers. But then beyond that, UDI could be a tool for them. You can now refer to inventory from manufacturers with a universal ID number that helps for inventory management, all of the things we've listed here. There, we talk about reimbursement. So as providers are really starting to focus on their inventory management and, shaving off cost where they can, UDI could be a valuable tool for them to help do that. Also, a common language to talk to the manufacturer about when there are inventory issues. You can easily identify a device and talk about the exact same thing, as opposed to speaking in generalities or, well, I think that point was made. And then Furthermore, you can integrate UDI. So AIDC being present and required on the label means that scanning capabilities will be available throughout the value chain. And so that will help them with their EHRs. They'll be able to just scan the UDI into the patient record, utilize that in their supply chain systems. If the barcode is, or if the UDI is getting entered at the point of use, then it's also probably getting communicated if they are buying inventory outright that's sitting on the shelf. So the provider will still be able to scan those devices and use them at a later date. So, and then at the bottom, compliance with CMS requirements. UDI is going to be more and more integral to this industry. And yeah, it may affect payment at the end of the day. So bottom lines, UDI is a tool to protect patients from harm. That is what it's all about. That's why it's important. There's a lot of different perspectives you can take about the burden it places on the industry, about how much work it's going to take, the time we don't have, yada, 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 which are true. I worked during that period on UDI. I know it was an incredibly large burden for the medical device industry, but at the end of the day, we are talking about making patients safer, which is what it's all about. Having positive outcomes, and if there is an issue, being able to protect the patient. And then UDI is the source of truth, one identifier to rule them all. So now when you use a UDI, there's no doubt about what the lot number is, what the expiration date is. When you think about other, it's the bottom bullet point here, but when you think about other supply chains, think about how an airline or an airplane is made, or a car is made. Maybe you can think of a better example, but I think the point is that we have an expectation that supply chains are becoming pretty efficient these days. You may be able to tell where any iPhone is, based on the identifier that's assigned to it. Why can't we do the same thing with a medical device? If I have something in my body, I should certainly know where it came from and if there's going to be an issue with it. So very big impact at the end of the day. And then that middle bullet point there, sales reps and distributors are the bridge between the manufacturer and the provider. This is how UDI happens. It's not just that you create it and then it magically makes its way there. It involves lots of people functioning according to an established process and having a care and concern for the UDI and what it's about. So being able to do that and do it well is going to matter to companies going forward. It may matter to their relationships, definitely to their ability to streamline their own operation. So competitive advantage. So now we talk about kind of the perspectives on UDI, like I mentioned before, kind of having that begrudging attitude of like, we got our UDIs, we're good. Let's just focus on what's in front of us. Let's sell some devices. Great attitude in terms of getting out there and getting things done, but UDI is not just a set it and forget it type thing. It's going to be ongoing. You have to keep creating UDIs for inventory that you create. But then the entire field operation is going to be governed by UDI, or at least, think about it that way. Think about it as, is the UDI this piece of information that you're going to drag through your whole value chain? Or is it something that you're going to anchor on and use operationally to have a source of truth and to know where a device is? You kind of have a choice there. So do the upfront work, figure out how to operationalize UDI for your company, get it into the systems it needs to be in, get the scanners that you need. ConnectSx, little plug for us here. We allow you to use the camera on any of your devices to scan your UDIs. So there's a lot of options out there. But perception doesn't really match reality. When you think about the time it takes up front to set yourself up versus the value of having a device be able to be scanned at any point in the value chain and know where it is, move it, sell it, the money saved by not having regulatory issues. And then once we kind of get to that point, having the competitive advantage of being good at UDI, that might actually end up in your reputation at some point. So how can Beacon help? So Beacon is our inventory and case management product that we sell, and we have chosen to use UDI as an anchor operationally. So it is the source of truth in our system. And we've tried to do as much as we can to help companies with UDIs. We can't create them for you. We are not an issuing agency. Um, and it will take some work on your part, of course, but we can help you store and track those UDIs. We can help you verify those UDIs. So we have internalized the standards, even though we don't create UDIs, we can break one down into its component parts to verify it. We can generate your barcodes, as you can see here in this slide. Once you get that UDI in there, we can generate a barcode that you could download and add to your label. And then already mentioned, but barcode scanning, huge aspect of this. In our system, you can use barcode scanning throughout the value chain to identify and use the product and even create the inventory using the UDI. So this is an example of where the UDI could be stored, and there's that verify button right there. You can kind of see here that it's already broken this sorry, I'm saying UDI a lot. You can see how it's broken that UDI down into its component parts. And so we do that for you. And then you see how those pieces of information are now grayed out. They are not able to be changed as long as that UDI is there, because we treat it as the source of truth. So if the UDI says you have one lot number, someone should not be able to enter another lot number. If the UDI says a product is expired, no one should be able to change that expiration date to something else in the future. So, it is the source of truth. And then in a number of ways, we leverage barcode scanning to help you use the UDI throughout your process. You can scan a label. So after you've created your product and submitted the UDI to the GoodID database, we connect to the GoodID data. We connect to the GoodID database so that you can actually scan your label, and all that information there that you see in the image on the left will show up. It'll be pulled from the GoodID database, leveraging what the FDA has created to make your inventory creation much easier and expedient. All over here on the right-hand side, you can see we have a scanner. You can just use the image on your phone and essentially use that to locate a device anytime you're searching for it within your system. So, maybe you're just trying to look up inventory. You can scan a label to do that. Use it as a search term. You can use it to identify an item and transfer it throughout your ecosystem. And then at the point of use, sales reps can scan that device to mark it as used in a case. So we try to make it as easy as possible for the sales reps to just scan a label, so that it makes it as easy as possible for them to get their job done. And again, make this an operational efficiency, not a burden. So that is my presentation on UDIs. And with our last 15 minutes, I'd love to invite questions. So I'm going to stop my shared screen if I haven't already. And I'll check out the Q&A. So please, if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer. I have much more experience with HIBIC than GS1. And while I have expertise, I am by no means the expert on UDI, but please, if you have any questions, let me know and I'll do my best. So I'll give you a couple minutes here. Not seeing any questions yet. But I do encourage you guys to reach out if you have any questions. So maybe they come up a little bit later. Maybe you want help talking about what your UDI process looks like, or working through some of these questions. That is something we can certainly approach with you. We can talk about how Beacon may be able to help, but if there's any other way we can help, we will certainly do our best to help you out. So it is a large issue. something that shouldn't be taken lightly, and obviously takes a lot of time and work to get right. But again, think of the supply chain of the future. How do you want the product that's getting used in your surgery to be handled and tracked? So that's kind of what we're talking about here. All right. I have not gotten any questions, so we're going to close things up and give you back the last 10 minutes of the hour. But thank you for tuning in, and we're going to be posting this recording a little later in the week once we've had a chance to process it. And please tune into our next webinar. Have a good rest of your Tuesday. Thanks.